Doing a brake job on your own vehicle is something that most people with basic hand tools can manage. This is for a Mazda CX-5. This is Chris vs. Life.
Tools that you're going to need for this project are going to include a hammer, a ratchet with a 15mm and a 17mm socket, an extension, not so much to get in tight places as to get around some of the tight places. You may also want a hammer to remove the rotor, and you're going to need a lug wrench. You're also going to need something to support the vehicle. Some people use their tires. I recommend using jack stands and wheel chocks on the wheels that aren't currently being used for the optimal safety. The first thing that you need to do is to make sure that you loosen all of the lug nuts while the vehicle is still on the ground. It's very important to do this because you don't want to have the vehicle up in the ground and then try and do it with your lug wrench. If you have an impact wrench, then this is not a problem that you'll have to deal with. But if you're using the lug wrench that came with the vehicle, you want to make sure you do it while it's on the ground. Don't take them off, obviously, until you've got the vehicle jacked up, but go ahead and loosen all of them up a little bit. Once you have the vehicle up in the air, then you can go ahead and remove all of the lugs and take off the tire and expose the rotor and the caliper. At this point in time, you are going to be ready to take apart the caliper and begin removing the rotor and do all of the necessary prep for your brake job. You'll notice here the back view of the front caliper. The large bolt with the markings 10 on it is the bolt that you'll need to remove the caliper, and the bolt behind the hose and to the right of it in this picture is the bolt that you'll need to remove in order to take the bracket for the caliper off. You'll need to remove both the caliper and the bracket in order to get the rotor off of the vehicle. Something to take note of, on the passenger side front wheel, because of the placement of the large nut and bolt, there's not a clearance to get the large socket, and so you may need to use an extension on your ratchet so that you have clearance to remove the caliper. In this image, you can see that the two bolts holding the caliper have been removed and the caliper has been removed. In this image, you can see the caliper has been removed and you can get a clear view of the caliper bracket, which is still holding the brake pads in place. You can also see the brake pad retaining clips that are mounted inside of the caliper bracket. This is going to give you a good indication of what you'll need to do to finish removing the bracket and the pad. There's two bolts left, and then you will have everything removed. As you can see here, everything nicely on display. Now that you have everything removed, it's a simple matter of removing the front rotor. This is where the hammer potentially comes in. There's also a tool that you can probably rent from your local auto parts store called a brake rotor remover tool that is basically a two-jawed puller. Whatever the case may be, depending on how much salt is in your area, you may or may not need to use something a little more forceful than just your hands to get the rotor off. But once you've got the rotor off, you will be ready to start reassembly and replace your new brake pads and rotor. Now that everything's been removed, the rest of the process is actually fairly easy. The only other tool that you might need at this point is some kind of clamp in order to compress the caliper before you install it on the new brake pads. But the process from here is fairly straightforward and goes basically reverse of what you've just done. The first thing you'll do is you'll clean off the new rotor. You'll need to use some brake parts cleaner spray. These rotors have oil on them that you don't want to leave on, as it is more than likely just going to make your brakes squeak from the moment that you have them because it'll glaze the rotors. And especially with most new rotors having a nice non-directional finish and everything on them, you want to preserve as much of that work as possible. So once you have that installed, the next thing that you'll need to do is install the brake caliper bracket with the two bolts that you've removed. Then you want to install the brake pads, paying special attention to making sure that you get the clips in correctly. Once this is done, you'll need to actually go ahead and compress the piston that was in the brake caliper. Like I said, C-clamps is a great way to do this. I used two of them. to make sure that it compressed evenly and straight. You can also do a single C-clamp and a block of wood if it fits in. Whatever you happen to have around should work sufficiently. It's not that difficult to compress, so it doesn't take a lot of effort. Once you have that compressed, you can go ahead and use the 2 bolts that you took out and reinstall that, and everything should be ready to go. And then you simply repeat the process on the other side and put your tires back in and drop the vehicle down and tighten back up the lugs, and then you're ready for the rears.
To change the rear brake pads on a Mazda CX-5 is a little simpler than the front brake pads, especially because in this instance I'm only going to change the pads because the rotors are in very good shape back here. With the front ones I wanted to go ahead and change out the rotors, not so much because they were grooved or anything like that, but just because that's where most of the braking comes from, and having fresh clean rotors on the front of my CX-5 was an important thing. So for the back, the tools that you're going to need are once again your ratchet with a 15mm socket on it, and also because the pistons on the brake calipers on these are not the kind you compress with a C-clamp, but the kind that you have to twist in, you'll either need to have a brake caliper tool, which is a little square piece that will mount on the end of a ratchet, or you can use a pair of pliers to accomplish the same thing. You'll need to turn it clockwise to twist it back in once you have the new brake pads on. You'll also obviously need, as usual, jacks and jack stands to lift the vehicle up, and your rear brake pads. Now, the rear brake pad goes on a little different from the front. The rear brake pad has on it a clip that helps hold it into place, and you'll see that right here. So this is the clip, and what will happen is this will compress in like that and then slide in, and it'll be held in place flat like that. It'll be easy to see once you get the old pad out, but this needs to go inside and slide in the brake pad clip to hold it into place. So just be aware of that, and you'll be able to tell which one is the front and which one is the rear, although honestly they probably could be interchangeable. But on these, if I remember correctly, the front one is the one that has the clip. So there you go. With the wheel off, you can see the clip I'm talking about right here. This slides inside to the caliper clip, and then there's pieces up here and down here that the caliper slides up and over, or the pad slides up and over, and that's what holds the pads in place. These are very similar to the front ones in that once you take the caliper off, which also uses a 15mm, the pads will stay in place. And so what you'll need to do is you'll need to take them out from the side opposite the clip. So you'll rock them back and forth and pull them out to get this out. And same thing to get them in, you'll drop this side in first and slide the other side in. So as you can see, the caliper has been screwed in. And like I said, you can use the tool or a pair of pliers, and all you'll do is just fit it in the groove and turn to clockwise direction to screw it back in so that you can have room to fit onto the pad again. So you can see there's plenty of room now to go for the new pads. Obviously there's a lot of wear on these old pads, and that's the problem with these rear pads, is they come out pretty quick. Now like I said, the easiest way to get these out is to take them out from the top side, and then it pulls out like that. And you can see what'll happen is you'll put this side in, slide the bottom side in, and then compress everything and rock the top side in to get it to fit back in. And then the same thing, the pad there on the back one, and so you'll rock the other side out to get it out. The back one always gives me more problems than the front, so I'll get that pulled out and then we'll continue. Okay, and so to put the brake pad in, like I said, what you'll need to do is you'll need to compress this in on this bottom side here. Okay, let's maybe start over. So you'll compress this bottom side in first, and then rock the top side in by compressing everything. And it is definitely much easier said than done. But, oh, there we go. Once everything is rocked nicely into place, everything should just slip in and seat. And it didn't seat properly, so I'll need to take it out and do it again. So, bend that back into place. Well, I'm not going to be able to do this one-handed, but you get the idea. And here is the new front pad properly seated. If you'll notice, the pin has slid, or the piece here that works as the brake sensor is slid in between the pad holder and up here. And so it just fits in nicely like that. And now you'll notice the new very meaty brake pads are installed and ready to go. So all I have to do now is to slide the caliper back into place. To put these pins in. It should, there we go, slide right into place and be ready to go. And now you'll install the two nuts, the bolts that hold everything in place. And that's all there is to this job. Now you just have to button everything back up and you are finished.